Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here for this. I truly appreciate it. The day has been very interesting. Lots of learning from the very beginning. Lots of talk that I think actually build onto some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. But I don't know if any of you were in here in the morning. The day started with Keith Sofa. He spoke about his experiences as an environmental service worker 30 years ago, and one of the things was he had to go into a facility. He worked, that was at St. Mike's 30 years ago, and at his first job, he had to go in there and he had to train with somebody that only spoke Portuguese. He didn't speak Portuguese in his case, so he had to now learn from sign language and a couple of other things. So he actually got me thinking as I was hearing that actually goes with some of the things that I'm going to talk about now, where honestly environmental service workers do a lot of hard work, whether it's in the hospital space, which is where I've got a lot of experience, but also in other settings as well, because I think there's people from schools, there's people from other institutions as well. But what I'm going to talk about is really some of my experiences from the last little while, from healthcare and so on, where we learned some very interesting things. So I'm going to walk you through a very speedy journey through like infection, disinfection, and a couple of other things. Is that cool? Are you guys ready to roll? Yeah, I sense some excitement here. All right, good. That's awesome. All right, so disclaimer, I work for Clorox. They pay me. I also volunteer with a couple of different organizations as well. But one of my most favorite organizations that I volunteer with is called the C. diff Foundation. It's a patient-led organization that they do work around C. difficile prevention. And patients that have picked up C. difficile in the hospital, they then volunteer in that organization. So I get to volunteer with those people. It's a very rewarding experience. In addition, the views expressed in this thing are my own, not really Clorox. It's just what I thought and read up and so on. So as I said, I'm going to talk about the state of cleaning and disinfection. Hospital focus primarily, but I'm going to speak about other areas as well. I'm going to discuss the prevention strategies. Then I'm going to talk about a lot of interventions and why they fail. Then I'm hoping that we'll have some time for some questions. So let's go on a journey back in time. So 2010, that was me. Used to work as a nurse. Had less hair on my face back then. That was at St. Joseph's on the Toronto East General Hospital at the Coxwell there. I just recently got on a job as an infection prevention and control guy. I had to step into a role of learning about infection control. I didn't know what that was because I knew nursing because that's what I had done. So one of my first jobs was I had to go to a unit and understand why a patient, this is off Google by the way, so it's not the real patient, but why this patient, Agnes, had picked up an infection. Agnes came in, had been at home, living nice and nice, then she fell, broke her hip, then came into the hospital. When she came into the hospital, she was put on one of our units, which wasn't the best one as far as a couple of things. First off, their cleaning was one of the poorest that we had. We knew that because we tracked it with GlowGerm and ATP. So Agnes drew the unlucky straw of being on that unit. We also knew that this was an area where nursing were not doing the right things as far as hand hygiene and a couple of things, and she had an IV at the time, so we knew things might not be going so well. The hand hygiene on that unit was one of the lowest that we had in the whole hospital, 30%. So that's almost like 3 out of 10 nurses will wash their hands. The rest of the 7 might not. So that's the unit that Agnes went in. So long story short, Agnes ended up getting tested positive for a urine. She ended up having a UTI, presented a little bit of a confusion and so on and so on. The bugs that we found on Agnes are the ones that are typically found in poop. And hence they probably got there by people's hands and stuff. So that's what we found in her urine. She ended up having a hip that she had a surgery on, got infected, ended up having chest case, presented with C. difficile, also picked up a superbug infection called carbapenemase-resistant Enterobacteriaceae. Really, really not cool stuff. So this was my first month on the job. And it was a very unfortunate situation. But I decided to take this as an opportunity to go in and really break down all the different parts about the situation. There's a lot of things that added to this thing, and I'll tell you what they are. But interestingly, as you look in, you start thinking, okay, how long do some of these bacteria stay on surfaces? If you look at the very top to the very bottom, difficult to read, but C. difficile, which is what she ended up having, is somewhere in the middle. But there's some easier to kill stuff that actually stays so long in the environment. So it got me thinking, why is it that simple things that are easy to kill stay so long in the environment, right? Doesn't jive. So keep that thought. So let's talk about the current state of disinfectant. We'll get back to that story in a bit. But let's talk about current state of disinfectant, right? This is the kind of things we know. It's a perfect storm, right? bacteria are getting stronger. We're running out of antibiotics. People are moving around the world a lot, right? I was in Vegas last week. I'm in San Diego tomorrow. And every single time I travel, I bring the things that I had with me here over there and everywhere else. So if somebody had pink eye today, I give them a handshake. I take my pink eye with me to San Diego. When I come back from San Diego, I'm going to bring the hepatitis A, which is they're having there. They're having an outbreak of hepatitis A. I'll bring that back over with me, right? In addition to the other stuff that I buy when I'm there, but I bring the hepatitis with me. So you get to see all this stuff. In addition to all that beautiful stuff, a lot of chaotic things are going on. So this leads to a whole bunch of outbreaks, left, right, and center, chaos, right? Things are going on. This is something that's going on, right? But why does it happen? If you look at in a hospital, right, you've got the person in the bed, right? That's my little Agnes lady there. While she's lying in the bed, somebody comes in, doesn't wash their hands, and then they touch her. Then those germs that Agnes had or that came on that person's hands ends up with Agnes. Then healthcare worker goes into another room, and the cycle goes and goes and goes. So environmental services becomes critical in the process, right? And that's the same for a school. We're talking about your school, same deal. Those hands from somebody else are the ones that help some of those germs move. Except for Renata, who's sitting really close to me here. Everyone else is immune to my spit because it doesn't go that far. But Renata is within firing range right now. So she gets some of my spit, and she's the only one that's really at risk. Everyone else, the only way you're going to pick up infections is as we touch each other and say hi, right? So that's key to know. So what do we suggest? We suggest a couple of different things. I've already talked about most of them, but I'm going to focus on environmental disinfectant today. Right? So in my bad. I'm loving your name, by the way. In the case of Agnes, my patient, I'm going to focus on environmental disinfectant because once we started doing the deep dive, everything else we had to grab off, right? We figured out how to do the rest of the stuff, but the environmental disinfectant was the one way with a little bit of gaps. So let's look at some of the things that we had to think about. When you want to choose a disinfectant, who here has to choose disinfectants? Raise your hands. If you do, are you involved in selecting disinfectants? Good, I see some people. These are the things you want to think about, right? You don't just want to think about money, but you want to think about all these, right? So on there, starting from the top, is does it kill a whole bunch of stuff? AKA, is it broad spectrum spores, is antimicrobial? Does it work fast? And fast is relative. Something that kills in 1 minute compared to something that kills in 10 minutes, what do you call fast? 1 or 10? 1, good. But many people are stuck doing the 10 minutes. At the end of the day, you look all through these things here. These are some things that you want to be thinking about when you're choosing a disinfectant. When I talk to environmental service workers, guess what they tell me? They're like, these are so many choices that I have to go through. Because once you start going through all these subclasses, you end up having a bit of a predicament. So using the example that I spoke about, what you end up having is too many choices, Homer Simpson, too many things to do. But at the end of the day, it's really born out of the fact that information is coming very fast and furious. The session we just attended right now, the guy was talking about some IT stuff that went over my head, right? But that's the reality of the world we live in now. We have to know those things. And because you came to this session today, by the time you go back to work tomorrow, they expect you to know these things. So this is the same pressure that trickles all the way down. Way too many choices. Right. But what do we expect out of disinfectants? Well, first off, just focus on the thing at the very bottom there. We want to clean for health and make sure things are good. At the same time, we want to clean for appearance. We want things to look nice and shiny. But I think what we're moving to is that sweet spot in the middle where both come together. Right. Just cleaning so that things look nice and shiny is not good enough. The running joke at a hospital I once worked at is if you actually get in a room and the floor is very shiny, if you start doing the ATP testing, which is a way to quantify how much bacteria might be sitting on the surface, you'll see that the person with the shiniest floor is normally the one with the most poorest score of cleaning, which they all had the same time, right? And the environmental service worker told me this one time. He's like, Bali, if I have 30 minutes clean a room, right, if I shine it up, that's time coming from the other things I could do. So at the end of the day, it's the same time they have in the day, right? So unless you prioritize and decide what you want your staff and workers to do, then you end up running into those problems. So in here, the other key thing to think about is when I often get asked, teach me about cleaning and disinfectant from experienced cleaners, most of the problems that they're asking for is about what should I use to kill what. This little graph here is very important, and if you get a chance, I'm sharing the slides, by the way, so you will have this. Just get familiar with this, because this here gives you a range of what you want to be thinking about, right? So starting from the very bottom, right there with the envelope viruses, is the easiest stuff to kill. So your flu is easy to kill. Your Ebola type stuff is easy to kill. As much as Ebola might be scary, it's very easy to kill. So down here at the bottom here. It goes up to vegetative bacteria, gets harder with fungi, it goes a little bit more complicated with non-envelope viruses. Non-envelope viruses, an example of that is like pink eye. More complicated to kill, so it gets up in the range there. As you go higher, you get to your TB, and even higher, you get to your C. diff. The most problems that we're facing in hospitals right now is with things like C. difficile. And the reason for that is that's the kind of stuff. But if you're working at a school, flu season is coming, and if you don't know or you haven't heard, this might be the worst flu season we have ever seen for the last 50 years. So get ready in wherever you work. Get your hand hygiene stuff done, get your flu vaccinations done, get your flyers and your handouts from Toronto Public Health, because when you try and call them, they might not be able to come and help you with that stuff. So get it done now, right? So if there's any takeaway that you're getting from this is Australia had a tough flu season. They tell us what we're gonna have, and it's gonna be hard. Right? So people use quarts. Quarts get up to about there. So when you're now getting into non-envelope viruses, you're getting into the danger zone. So if you're getting anything that is above that quart range, you can't kill it with a quart, right? Think about that. Next piece, if you are now trying to get into killing like certain stuff like TB, you're getting in there, you're touching the surfaces with hydrogen peroxides, right? But as you get to want to kill more, you're getting into hydrogen peroxides with other combinations, right? But the superb stuff that you really get to kill all that shebang is that right there, bleach. So I'll give you an example. That the place, what did I say? San Diego, where they're having the outbreak right now of hepatitis. They've moved to doing some crazy, weird stuff. They've taken all the homeless people off the street. They've started cleaning all the streets with bleach, right? When Ebola came about, what did they use? Bleach. It's a last go-to, but you don't necessarily need to go that way if you're killing things down there at the bottom. But what this allows you to do is there's a right tool for a right job and a right purpose. But this now, when I share this with environmental service workers in any industry, they end up saying, hey, teach me more. Let me understand what this is. Because they now have to make selections around what to use here and there. Good? So, selecting the right product is about kill claims. Does it kill what, and the other? We talked about that through those slides. Useful. Kill time. Does it kill in 2 minutes? Does it kill in 3 minutes? Does it kill in 5, 10, 20, 30? You need to know that. And can your staff keep it wet for that period of time? So it becomes critical to know that. And that's the same as the wet time, spoke about that. The other things you want to think about is what else am I looking for? What else drives compliance? So if I'm in a private school where people are really conscious about smells and they want green products, then you need to make an additional decision related to that. If you're in a place where there's a lot of turnover and you can't afford to keep surfaces wet for a while, you've got to factor in those things. But all these things become the extra icing of consideration. But that is the full buffet of selection of thought processes. So either it's done at your level or it's outsourced down to the staff at their level. The other thing you want to think about is, and this is something that comes up a lot, right? What is the difference between a ready-to-use product, a dilutable, and so on? What do I need to be thinking about? And this becomes a serious point of consideration. When you're in a ready-to-use, you're not mixing, right? And not mixing sometimes is a good thing, because there's certain times when people mix and they end up having poor outcomes. I was just speaking to Vince there, and we had a conversation about where one of his staff accidentally mixed some stuff and then a plume went up, right? I worked at a facility where somebody mixed bleach and ammonia. Not a good thing, right? So we're not running test labs in the hospital or facilities that you work at, so mixing is not a good thing. So if you're mixing, you always want to know the MSDS. What does it require for the concentrate, right? So that your staff are meeting those requirements. And when they decant into something, are they meeting all those SDS requirements? So it becomes a bit of a challenge. Many people are avoiding all that by going to a ready-to-use product because it now has the ability of like, it's just set up, you're always good to go and there's no need. And then it tends to cost more, but you now need to do your own cost analysis around what that looks like. And I know many companies in there, if you did a walkthrough, have ways in which they can do cost calculators for you based on your particular unique setting. So always a good thing. Not much to stand out in there. The other thing you want to think about is it's also a balancing scale. You want to kill a whole bunch of stuff, but at the same time, you want it to be compatible. And compatibility is about surface, as in it doesn't damage the surface, but it's also about is it adopted by people, as in it doesn't smell. So it's that teeter-totter little scale there. And you always want to make sure that there's that perfect balance. And don't make one more powerful than the other. You have to make sure that you're going for that perfect balance. And a thing I often use when I'm asked by environmental service is what and how to disinfect is this thing called the Spalding principle. The Spalding principle is a way of deciding how and what to use as a disinfectant. In the first column, it is telling you what part of a body of a human being it might touch. It's saying intact skin, which is like just normal skin like this, mucous membranes, or sterile areas. Depending on those subclasses, there's also an example of the different pieces of equipment. And then it also tells you what device classification that is. Then also you then get to decide what minimum level of disinfectant it is. This is very important for anything that you decide to disinfect, because if something is meant to be sterilized, like a piece of surgical equipment, and you're wiping it with alcohol and you're using it on the next person, not cool, because that will have the same viruses and bacteria that the next person had transferred onto the next person. So you don't want to be doing that. So I always then give people a quiz. So if you had a piece of BP cuff and it's just being strapped on, would you need to sterilize that? No, good. Would you need to use a high-level disinfectant? No. Would you need to use a low-level disinfectant? Good. This game gets more exciting after happy hour. But this is kind of that stuff. If you had a scope, that's the scope in the middle there, goes up the person's bum so that they can get to see what's going on the inside, colonoscopy style. Would you need to use a low-level disinfectant on that? Hi, the guy's cheating. Go straight to the answer. Okay, there you go. All right, so hang out with that guy. He'll tell you the remainder of this stuff. So current state of cleaning. Let's talk about a couple of good things here. Viruses, bacteria stay a long time on the surface, right? So you got to get to them or else they'll wait for you. While they are waiting, they will make people sicker and sicker and sicker. So get to them. They go as little as 5 days on some, all the way to 40 days on the others. So it's a long period of time. Right? In addition to that, this is an interesting study. They looked at a whole bunch of papers that were published over the last 10 years. Out of those papers, they averaged how well people were doing as far as cleaning. And they concluded that for most of the rooms, it is a toss-up, a coin toss. It's half and half. The chance of a room not being properly cleaned is 50%. So when you go into a hospital room right now, this information has been reproduced in general. You will most likely be 50% chance that it was cleaned well, every single nook and cranny, or it's 50% chance that it wasn't cleaned well, right? And you ask yourself, why is that the case? Not all wipes are created the same. If you're using microfiber, things get more complicated. If you're using dilution system, things get more complicated. There's way more variables. But if you want to compare wipe for wipe, this is a study that was done by the FDA, right? What they were able to do is, I'll give you an example. They took a piece of equipment and then they applied some germs in protein form. They knew exactly how much they put onto that surface, right? And then they came back around after wiping with different products available on the market, and they were able to see that each of those had different abilities to take off gunk on a surface, right? So some did well, as in didn't have anything left. Some still had a whole bunch of stuff left. And you ask yourself why. I will tell you this. If you have any wipes that are ready to use today in your facility, anywhere that you work, go and touch them. Feel them, right? Same thing as my wife, whenever we go to a hotel room traveling anyway, she has a fascination with the thread count on sheets. Some are silkier, some are rougher, and so on. I really do not care. Half the time I go in a hotel room, I just want to knock out, right? At the end of the day, that feel makes a difference in wipes. It tells you how much it can pick up on a surface. So if the wipe cannot pick up stuff off a surface, it will stay there, right? So that's an important consideration. If you're using certain microfiber cloths, and have you heard of the thing called quaternary ammonium binding? Quad binding? No? No. So quad binding means that if you have a certain microfiber, the quat juice gets held onto by the microfiber. So when you wipe a surface, it doesn't release it back onto the surface. Right? Let me say that slowly. You have a rag It's supposed to release stuff onto a surface so that it kills the stuff on the surface. Because of this concept called quad binding, it doesn't actually do that. Do you think you then kill the stuff on the surface? No. So at the end of the day, these are some of the things that are happening.
So which one is the best for white? Going back to
Yeah, I work for Clorox. I won't say Clorox because the study says Clorox. Yeah, yeah.
The microfiber cloth,
Yes.
that is less effective than
Yes,
the one.
yes. Depending on the disinfectant that you're using. If you're using a quat, right, microfiber will hold on to the quat. The concept of quat binding is exclusive only to microfiber, right? So if you have a quat in your facility and you also have microfiber, you will have quat binding, period. Who has quats? Who has microfiber? Good. Take a look at that when you get home. This is your homework for the day, right? Take a look at that when you get home. We already know a lot of information about how to go about doing this beautiful stuff. So in my role in infection control, there's a lot of guidance documents I look at. As I said, Keith started his session today. He spoke about a lot of guidance documents, including PIDAC and so on and so on. I also look at a whole bunch of documents from other countries. But like depending on what work you do, there's also certain guidance documents you need to be familiar with. And going into flu season, you might be working with the Ministry of Public Health, or you might be working with some other governing body. Get to know those. But we do know a lot about this stuff already. However, as I say, the rates continue to climb. There's other things outside your control. So I spoke about choosing disinfectants. That's one. There's other things that are outside your control. See that little house? That I couldn't find a picture of a hospital, so I used the house. But there's many things that are happening. So even in the community, you're getting tainted food sources. If you swab certain meat in a grocery store, meat has been found to have C. difficile even, right? If you've been in a hospital before, chances of you having C. difficile are up a certain percentage. If you have a dog and you're picking up poop, most likely you might be colonized with C. difficile. Certain water sources have been found to have C. difficile. Soil has C. difficile. Infants have C. difficile. I could go on and on here, but the gist is there's certain things that are outside our control. So breaking the chain of infection becomes important. In the general public, out of a sample of 100 people, one person carries C. difficile natural in their gut. So in here, one of us here is a lucky C. diff carrier, right? So that's something that happens, right? As you look at that, I spoke about how difficult some of these things are to kill. Even more complicated is if you have been in a patient room and somebody else comes in after you. The person that was in the bed before you, whatever they had, you're up to 50% chance of picking it up. Do you see how the statistics are adding up here? You have 50% chance of getting a room that's not cleaned. You have 50% chance of picking up the thing that the other person had when they were in the hospital before you. So you get to see why people pick up infections in the hospital, right? Let's keep up that stuff. Just to recap a lot of things that are challenging people, starting from the bottom. I didn't touch much on these, but you have delayed diagnosis, as in people find out today that they're having diarrhea today, like your patient or person that you spoke about. We don't know what they're having diarrhea with. 3 days later, we found out they have C. difficile. In healthcare, people used to go upset. Schools now, we're getting into flu season. Kids start having the sniffles on Monday. 10 kids start having the sniffles on Wednesday. The whole school gets shut down on Friday. By that time, like the kid is out of the bag, right? So that's typically what happens in real life world. That plays out many places. People don't seem to wash their hands as well as they should, right? I actually love watching people whether they are washing their hands or not. So today for lunch, I got a chance to actually see who washed their hands. I've got the results if you need them, right? People don't have the necessary knowledge sometimes. Staff are rushed. Whose staff here have all the time in the world and can get to every nook and cranny? I haven't seen anyone except for when I was in Dubai and also when I was in Saudi Arabia. They have a lot of time out there, right? Because they got way more staff. Multiple products which complicate things, which leads to your question, do I use Cavi? Do I use this? Do I use that? What contact time do I use? All this stuff. The bacteria are getting more complicated, so people need so much more information. Last but not least, you're looking at the poor support. So if you add all these things together, it's leading to a situation where people ask, show me, right? And you then need to ask, who am I going to get to show these folks, right? So out of here, there's a missing piece of the puzzle, which I'm talking about in a second, because there's good behavior and bad behavior in people. Who here is responsible? Who here takes the shortcut most of the time? See, can you see the picture well? See, you're walking around, you could take the long way or you could take the shortcut. Who here is team shortcut? I'm team shortcut. You guys don't take the shortcut?
It's dirty, right? It's dirty.
You're guilty of the shortcut, right?
No, it's dirty. The floor, no.
Oh, it's dirty. Oh, so you don't take the shortcut because it's dirty. Okay, all right. You guys are amazing. I've shown this around the world and everyone takes the shortcut. Except for you guys. Round of applause for yourselves. Darn, either that or a bunch of liars. Right, so let's look at what your staff are actually doing. What you see here is the number of percentages individually that surfaces are not cleaned. So far away from the patient right there, which is where the screen is, and back there where the oxygen is, 86% of the time it's not cleaned, right? The door, as you're getting in, 59% of the time it's not cleaned, right? The floor, 96% of the time. Fortunately, we don't believe in a 5-second rule in the hospital, I'm hoping, right? So that's a beautiful thing. The bedside, at the end of the bed there, 85. At the side where they keep their stuff, 93. So as you can tell, these are some of the percentages, right? And as you can tell, add up the 50% that we had initially, the other 50% on getting into a room, these percentages are not cleaning the room individually by surface, it's adding up. So let's transition a little bit into what should we be doing for our staff. This here is a good way of showing how staff learn, right? If you lecture them, which is at the very top, that they learn the least. If you read to them, they get to 10%. If they're audiovisual and you show them a video, it's up a little bit more. If you demonstrate, you're getting a bit more. But the most bang for your buck is when they get to teach others. So when you've shown somebody something, ask them to teach somebody else, right? And that's what I think is really where you get your big bang for your buck. So with most of the staff that I ask now, when I teach them or explain them something, I'm like, okay, you tell somebody else. So that's why it was good when Corey chimed in, because when you chime in, then the other people that are in your same cohort that are learning with you are like, oh, wait a minute. Now Corey knows it. Okay, let me now learn it, right? It helps also create that, team learning. So there's many ways that we go about doing this, right? As you know, we now, even at Clorox, one of the things that we pride ourselves is implementing effective protocols. So we try and go in, we provide the training and support, we do the clear roles, we create buy-in. Buy-in is the most important thing, right? When you're making a change, you've got to let people know why you're making the change, right? Don't let people just walk in and then see a change and not know why it happened. So most of the time, most of the work is actually around that buy-in phase. People feel that this is inefficient, not necessary, but honestly, this gets you a lot, right? And last but not least, create some protocols and checklists. People love them checklists because it helps them know what's going on. And when you're deciding on what to do, right, this is what they call the hierarchy of controls. This is a way to limit problems. The least effective thing is PPE, which is down there at the bottom. So if you're having a chemical that requires 50 pieces of PPE, most of the time, that's the least effective because staff are not going to wear it. So if you have a particular product that requires you to wear goggles, right, and certain special gloves, right, you need to know that. Because when the Ministry of Labor comes walking around as they're doing blitzes now, they want to be able to verify this information. So you want to make sure you're compliant with all these beautiful things. This is just a slide just talking about the cross-contamination. There's certain things that are more prone to cross-contamination. I think that's the other thing I hadn't even talked about. When you have reusable surfaces and things, they can get dirty. Whether it's tools, whether it's microfiber that's being mixed with other things, it can get dirty. So at the end of the day, you want to minimize that. That's where the ready-to-use thing comes in and becomes a thing that you want to think about. So we've talked about chemicals, but then you also have to think about other pieces of technology. You guys must have walked in there, you must have seen robots and other things. Non-touch systems are coming in, right? Things are getting a bit more interesting. This is a quote by one popular physician. He said, given the choice of improving technology or improving human behavior, technology is the better choice. So you will see a lot of push towards technology. Some of the technology that you're going to see is hydrogen peroxide vapor stuff, where it releases chemical and stuff, but you got to have the room shut down. That's a couple of things that you have to do. There's different versions of those. You also see UV. Anybody seen UV? Good. UV is there. You've also, there might be some UV vendors in there. Get a look, take a look, learn that stuff, because that stuff is coming to a theater near you, right? Electrostatic sprayers, they're coming up now. It's a way of spraying a surface and it coats everything. Get to learn these things, right? Because your staff are going to need to learn these things. So find a friend, partner with a buddy, get to learn these things before you're forced to learn them. And some of these things work. This is actually a UV studies that were done. It shows you all the comprehensive study. I'm going to share the links. You can take a look at them. I also have my business card. If you have any questions, you can ask. But out of all this stuff, you need to show people how to use these things. And these are just some tools on how to go about using UV. You can't expect people to get these tools and not be able to use them. So I'm just showing you a whole bunch of tools there. But you have to show people how to use this stuff, right? I have many hospitals now that bought $100,000, $60,000 UV machines and they're sitting in cubbies. Do you know why? They don't know how to use it. Same question goes around. How do I use it? Right? So it's one of those things that you have to partner with people to get to know how to use these things. Cool. How about soft surfaces? Well, PIDAC says you shouldn't have soft surfaces, right, in a setting. But when you go around and you take a look, I've gone in certain settings and there's 90% curtains. They still exist on the window in most rooms, right? There's chairs and stuff and so on. So surfaces do exist. So you want to be looking at products that have the ability to disinfect those soft surfaces. Because in rooms where patients go in, that 50% that we talked about where chances are somebody that had something in there is going to give it to somebody else, when you check on some of those surfaces, curtains are to blame. So you want to look at those things. So get the things that work. We spoke about ready to use versus thing. I won't get into that. But this is an important slide that I always like to check. In Ontario, if you have an outbreak, you can actually ask a group of experts to come and take a look at your facility. Whether it's a school, whether it's a hospital, it doesn't matter. This group is called the Infection Control Resource Team. You can ask for it on the ministry website, PHO and stuff. All the stuff I can share, it's also in the references at the end. Feel free to hit me up. What you want to do is, out of the visits that they did in Ontario, they made 5 conclusions. 1, failure to implement environmental service interventions was the most commonly identified issue. This is something that they saw across the province. Poor cleaning of shared patient equipment is key. Happens all the time. And this is not only just in hospitals, but also in my kids' school, for example. They take the board and the piano from one room, goes into the other room. The other kid had pink eye and had flu. It still goes into the other room. It doesn't matter. Then they're surprised why the pink eye from that room went into the other room. Dangerous chemical mixing is something that they're seeing, right? Hence, the Ministry of Labor is going to be looking at this stuff. So stay ahead of that. There's very little staff compared to what's needed to be there. So make sure we get that fixed. There's so much pressure in turning around rooms, and this is a big, big problem, right? When you look at sporicide, we talked about sporicide a little bit with bleach. This is where you also want to think about the different ways people are using bleach. If you want to kill C. difficile up here, there's many ways. Some people start with just the rooms where the person had a problem, right? Then they graduate to all washrooms. Because if you look at certain guidance documents, every single room that you have a patient that had C. difficile or had diarrhea that you don't know what the problem is, has to be cleaned with a sporicidal agent, which leaves you only 2 products in the country right now. Right? So think about that. So there's 3 types of sporicides: bleach, rescue, parasitic acids. So if I had a scenario, you have a 5 minutes, good. If you have a 650 bed facility, right, large facility, it's having a lot of C. difficile cases. You have many rooms that with high occupancy, and you were recently visited by the ministry. Should you be using a quart? Should you be using hydrogen peroxide at 0.5%? Okay, your 2 options become the 2 products I spoke about. Bingo. Bringing it all together, just to make sure we tie this up in a little bow here. 3 things you want to think about: people, processes, and products, right? It all comes together. Don't just focus on the people, because if you don't look at the other things, you're in a mess. The process alone without the people and the product is a mess. The product alone without the people is a mess. All together now. And the reason why you have to do this, it's the law, right? The Green Book, we use the Green Book here. Good, you get familiar with that. Section 23.2 says that as the supervisor, which most of you people are, by virtue of your organization having sent you here, because you now have more information than everyone else at the facility, you are at the responsibility to make sure everyone is practicing safe care around chemicals, around all this beautiful stuff. And when they get trained, you need the training records that show what they were trained about. If you do not have that, Ministry of Labor comes in visiting. then you have no proof that you trained your people. We have a whole bunch of training material. But who needs to be trained for how long? This is an example of hospitals. I don't have anything else in other settings. But essentially, that just shows you a breakdown of how long you need to be training people around disinfectant at the very least. In addition to that, you also want to have like cheat sheets that help them know how they're supposed to do stuff, right? And that goes for a whole bunch of stuff pretty much. So, a couple of stories here to wrap up the day. Got a whole bunch of places that we work from pretty much. And every single time what I find very interesting when I work with different facilities is, hey, how can I do this? And the nice thing I find is like, just like I said, Renata, connect with Bob. It's a beautiful thing. You connect people. Because we're in a world now where one day we will all be patients. So we've got to all collaboratively make that place a better place. Fortunately, we won't always need to come to your school, Vince, because I'm not going back to school anymore. Love TV too much. So
it's a private girls' school.
It's a private girls' school. Okay, in that case, I'm not coming. All right. So I was just on the internet last night, and I got this. This was actually very interesting. It showed an article about cleaning and disinfecting now versus in 1980. It showed two staff. The younger lady on the now there is working right now at Apple. The other lady on the other side used to work at Kodak, right? These are the facilities that they work at. By the way, Apple is the circle there that looks like futuristic and stuff, right? And then Kodak is the old building there. Kodak, actually, I have a soft spot for Kodak, but they shut down because they didn't innovate enough. You remember the Polaroid camera, right? Turns out they also had the patent for digital cameras and they didn't do anything with it, right? Fortunate. But that's Apple. What's interesting about these two folks is they now work for an outsourced company now. The other lady there worked at a company that actually owned their own environmental service staff. So the care that they got from their organization was such that you could actually rise through the ranks. You had benefits, you had all that stuff. This lady doesn't have the same. So they were talking to how what they were giving an example is the motivation that then comes there and the sense of care that can come sometimes. But what was interesting is in the articles at the bottom there, you can take a look at it, is it really got me thinking is what motivates your staff? Do you know or do you not know? But that's something that's, food for thought. And one of my parting last stories is I worked at a hospital once and a staff member told me, hey, Bali, how come we have a C. difficile outbreak, then we introduce a solution, problem goes away, and then we take out the solution, problem goes back again, and we've been doing it for 50 times over the last 20 years. That's what motivated me on this journey. Since I had that first question with that staff member, I'm still trying to figure that out and shut that down. So at the end of the day, I feel the solutions are there. The solutions are there in this room by talking to some of the people in this room, but I think the solutions are really there in the world. All we need to do is once we find it, stick with it, make it work. So takeaways, training is important in environmental services, and appreciate your staff at the very least. Give them a high five, cookies or that kind of stuff, whatever makes them happy. But know what makes them happy and appreciate them. That's the key to success.